They say every cowboy has two rides, the one that takes him away and the one that brings him home. Cole Turner left Mason Creek 10 years ago chasing glory, leaving behind the woman who loved him and the brother who trusted him. But the road has a way of bringing a man back to the places he tried to forget, and when he returns, he finds that time doesn't heal everything. It just buries a hurt beneath the dust. This is a story of one man's last ride home, a story about love, loss, and the quiet kind of forgiveness that only comes when you stop running. Tonight, I'll take you back to the heart of Texas, where the past still whispers through the wind, and one cowboy must face the hardest truth of all, that sometimes coming home isn't about being welcomed. It's about learning to forgive yourself. The road stretched out endlessly before him, cracked asphalt shimmering beneath the Texas sun. Cole Turner hadn't seen these plains in a decade, but the land hadn't forgotten him. Every fence post, every mile of wire, every hollow wind that blew across those open fields whispered the same thing. You're back. He didn't know why he'd chosen to return now. Maybe because there was nothing left to chase. The rodeo circuits had grown smaller, the cheers quieter, the trophies dustier. The thrill that once burned in his veins had turned cold. There were nights he woke up in strange motel rooms, unable to remember the last place he called home. And maybe, deep down, he always knew where the last ride would take him, back to Mason Creek. The town appeared like a mirage through the heat haze, framed by the rolling hills and the scent of sun-baked grass. He slowed his truck at the familiar wooden sign that welcomed travelers with chip paint and small-town pride. Population 2,183. The number hadn't changed in 10 years, except for the ones who'd left and never returned. Like him, he parked outside the feed store, the same one his father used to run before the business went under. The old building sagged with time, dust collecting on the windows, the faint memory of what once was still lingering like a ghost. Cole stepped out of the truck, his boots meeting the dirt with sound that echoed too loud for comfort. He stood there for a long while, hands on his belt, staring at the past as if it were something solid he could touch. The air was dry, brittle, carrying the faint scent of rain that would never fall. Across the street, people moved about their day, slower now, older. Familiar faces turned, eyes narrowing in recognition before quickly looking away. Mason Creek had always been a place that remembered, especially the ones who left when things got hard. Cole had been 24 when he left. He told himself he was chasing a dream, that he'd come back once he'd made a name for himself. But dreams have a way of turning into distance. One rodeo turned into another, one town into the next, until the road itself became the only thing that felt familiar. He won money, trophies, and scars, but he never found peace. Now, walking down Main Street again, he could almost hear the echoes of who he used to be. The kid who laughed too loud. The man who thought forever was a promise you could keep. His boots scuffed the same cracks in the pavement, the same ones he'd stumbled across with her by his side all those summers ago. Anna Grace Bennett. He hadn't said her name aloud in years. Didn't have to. It lived in his chest, deep and heavy, like the smell of rain before a storm. He remembered her hair catching sunlight like spun copper, her hands steady on a horse's reins, her laughter rolling through the air like music. She'd been everything soft about this hard place, and he'd left her behind like she was something he could come back to. As the sun dipped lower, Cole drove out toward his father's old ranch. The fields were overgrown, fences sagging under neglect. The barn door hung crooked, one hinge squealing like it was crying out after years of silence. Inside, the smell of hay, dust, and memory clung to the air. He ran his hand over a broken saddle and felt the weight of all the years he couldn't undo. Night came slow and quiet. The stars stretched across the sky, endless and sharp. Cole sat on the porch, staring at them like he used to when he was young, back when life still felt like something you could hold on to. The silence of the land pressed against him, heavy and familiar. And somewhere in that silence, he realized something that made his chest ache. He wasn't sure if he'd come home to stay, or just to say goodbye. Morning came quietly, soft light spilling through broken barn boards, turning dust into gold. Cole hadn't slept much. His mind had wandered through the same loop all night. The choices he made, the ones he didn't, and the people left behind to live with both. He sat with a cup of black coffee that had gone cold hours ago, staring out over the fields that once belonged to his father. The place looked smaller now, lonelier, like even the land had grown tired of waiting. He drove into town after sunrise. The streets were already alive with the low hum of routine, the same rhythm that carried Mason Creek through the years. Folks nodded politely but didn't linger. His name was still a quiet echo in the spaces between conversation. People here didn't forget, they just folded their memories into silence. He stopped outside the old community hall, drawn by the bright colors of banners strung across the building. Mason Creek Annual Rodeo, this Saturday night. He almost laughed. The rodeo, the very thing that took him away, still standing proud like a monument to everything he lost. He stood there a moment, watching volunteers carry boxes, hang lights, brush dust off the old bleachers. The air smelled of fresh paint and nostalgia. And that's when he saw her, Anna. She stood on the other side of the corral fence, clipboard in hand, her hair tied back the way she used to when she worked horses. 10 years hadn't changed the way she carried herself, calm, capable, sunlight caught in motion. The world seemed to go quiet for a moment, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Cole's chest tightened. He thought he'd imagined her so many times that seeing her now didn't feel real. She laughed at something one of the volunteers said, that same warm sound that had once been the center of his world. He stayed still, not ready to break the illusion, until she turned slightly and her eyes found him. It was a brief second, barely enough to register the look in them, but it was there, recognition, disbelief, something else that flickered and vanished before he could name it. She looked away first. Cole stood for a long while, unmoving. The years collapsed between them, heavy and sharp. He wanted to walk away. He told himself he didn't owe her anything, not an apology, not an explanation. But the truth was, he'd never stopped owing her both. That afternoon, he drove past the edge of town where her family ranch used to be. The Bennett place had always been the prettiest land in Mason Creek. Rolling fields, white fences, a porch that seemed to catch every sunset just right. It looked almost the same now, except for one thing. There was another truck in the driveway, one he recognized instantly, his brother's, Luke Turner. The memory hit like a slow punch. Cole had left both of them behind. His brother, who looked up to him, and the girl who waited for letters that never came. He'd heard rumors years back, whispers carried by the road that Luke and Anna had grown close. But rumors are easy to ignore when you're too far away to face them. Seeing it was different. Seeing the truth sitting right there in front of you had a way of quieting every lie you told yourself. Cole didn't stop. He just kept driving until the road turned to gravel and the sky bled orange. The sun dipped low, brushing the horizon with the kind of beauty that hurt to look at, the kind that reminded you how much time you'd lost. That night, he went to the old tavern on Main Street, the same one where cowboys drank after long rides, where laughter and music spilled out through open windows. He sat in a corner, half in shadow, nursing a beer he didn't taste. Around him, the town came alive in its easy rhythm. People talking about the rodeo, the rain they hoped would come, the same small things that filled small town lives. But to Cole, it all sounded distant. His thoughts were somewhere else. In the echo of a girl's laughter, the curve of her smile, the way her hands had once felt when she reached for him before he rode away that night so many years ago. He remembered promising he'd come back. He remembered how sure he'd been that love would wait. When the tavern emptied out, he stepped outside into the cool night air. The street was quiet, moonlight glinting off parked trucks and rain puddles from a storm that had passed earlier. Mason Creek slept easily, but Cole couldn't. He walked until he reached the edge of town again, where the fields stretched open and the world went silent. He stopped beside an old fence. It was splintered with age. There, Carved into one of the posts, faint but still visible, were the letters A+C. He ran his fingers over them slowly, the grooves worn shallow by weather and time. It was like touching another life. The next few days passed in slow rhythm. Cole fixed what he could on the ranch, replaced boards, cleared brush, tried to keep his hands busy. But no amount of work could quiet the storm building in his chest. Every time he saw Anna from afar, at the general store, by the rodeo grounds, it was like the years between them hadn't softened a thing. They'd only made the distance sharper. He told himself he was just here to settle his father's estate, to close old chapters. But the truth lingered every time he looked toward the horizon. He'd come back because some parts of your heart never stop calling you home, no matter how far you run. And deep down, Cole Turner knew the road that brought him back to Mason Creek wasn't done with him yet. The week moved like a slow-burning fuse. Mason Creek buzzed with the energy of the rodeo. Trucks rolling in, banners fluttering, lights being strung across the dusty arena. For everyone else, it was a celebration. For Cole Turner, it was a countdown. Every passing hour pulled him closer to something he couldn't name, only feel. That restless ache that comes when the past and present start to collide. Each morning, he'd find himself driving past the Bennett Ranch. He told himself it was just habit, that the road was quicker that way. But his eyes always betrayed him. Catching the sight of her, Anna, tending the horses, her hair lifting in the wind, her movement steady and familiar. There was a calmness to her now, a steadiness that time had carved into her like the land itself. He could almost believe she'd forgotten how deeply he once broke her heart. But love doesn't vanish. It changes shape, hides beneath duty, wears the face of acceptance. He could see it in her stillness, the way she paused when she sensed him nearby, the way her shoulders tensed just slightly before she walked away. The day before the rodeo, Cole drove into town for supplies. He parked by the feed store, but instead of going in, he wandered toward the field where the rodeo setup was nearly complete. The bleachers stood tall, flags snapping in the dry wind, the metal gates gleaming under the sun. He could almost hear the cheers from years past, the crowd roaring his name as he clung to a raging bull, the taste of victory, the rush of youth. Back then, the world had seemed endless. Now it felt smaller, quieter, like life itself had turned into something he was merely borrowing. That evening, a storm rolled in from the west, thick clouds tumbling across the sky, heavy with promise. The air grew cool, electric. Cole watched from the porch as thunder rumbled in the distance, the kind that shook the ribs and stirred old ghosts. He sat alone, the creak of the rocking chair the only sound, thinking about the years that had slipped through his fingers. He thought about the road, how it had given him fame, freedom, and emptiness all the same. How he'd chased the roar of the crowd until it drowned out the voice that mattered most. And now, standing on the edge of everything he'd run from, he realized that what he'd really been chasing all this time wasn't glory. It was forgiveness. When the first drops of rain fell, he didn't move. He let it wash over him. The cool, clean feel of it against his skin, the steady rhythm on the old porch wood. It reminded him of the night he left Mason Creek. That same rain had fallen then, soft and uncertain, like the sky itself was trying to tell him to stay. He'd kissed Anna goodbye under that rain, promising he'd come back for her. He remembered the way she'd held his hands, the way her eyes had filled with something between pride and fear. "Don't forget where home is," she'd whispered, but he had, for a long, long time. Lightning cracked through the sky, splitting the horizon into two worlds, the one he left behind and the one that still waited, silent and patient. Somewhere out there, Anna sat in her home, her life built on the ashes of what could have been. He wondered if she ever thought about that night, if she ever blamed him or herself, or she'd simply learned to fold the pain into her routine. The next morning, Mason Creek woke beneath a silver sky. The storm had passed, leaving puddles that mirrored the clouds. Cole saddled his old horse, the same one he left behind years ago, now slower, grayer, but loyal still. He rode toward town, the sound of hooves steady against the damp earth. The rodeo grounds were alive. People laughed, children ran, music played through distant speakers. But beneath it all, Cole felt the hum of something deeper, that quiet tension between what was and what could never be again. He watched from the edge of the crowd as Luke, his brother, helped Anna arrange ribbons near the main gate. Luke's hand brushed hers casually, like someone who had long earned the right to do so. It was simple, natural, and devastating. Cole felt a strange calm settle over him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't jealousy. It was understanding, sharp, bittersweet understanding. He'd left a hole in the world once, and life had simply filled it in without him. That's how time worked. It healed, it replaced, it moved on, even when hearts didn't. As dusk fell, the rodeo lights flickered on, bathing the arena in gold. The smell of dust, leather, and smoke filled the air. Somewhere, a fiddle played an old tune that carried like memory. Cole stood in the shadows by the fence, watching it all unfold. The life he could have had, now belonging to someone else. And yet, deep inside, beneath the ache, there was peace beginning to form, quiet, fragile peace. Because love, he realized, didn't have an end in possession. Sometimes, it ended in release. He turned to leave, but before he did, he looked one last time toward Anna. She wasn't looking his way. She was laughing at something Luke said, her eyes bright under the lights. But for Cole, that was enough. Seeing her happy, even if it wasn't with him, was enough to make the weight in his chest ease. Just a little. As he walked away from the arena, the sound of the crowd faded behind him. The night air was cool, gentle against the skin. Above, the stars began to break through the clouds, one by one. Quiet reminders that even the darkest storms pass eventually. Cole mounted his horse, the leather saddle creaking under his weight. He looked out over Mason Creek, his town, his past, his lesson, and smiled faintly. He didn't know where the road would take him next, but for the first time in years, he wasn't running from it. He was simply ready to ride. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the scars and dust, he knew that love, real love, never truly dies. It just changes the way it stays with you. The morning after the rodeo came quietly, with sunlight filtering through a thin veil of mist that hung over the fields. Mason Creek felt still, emptied of its noise and excitement. The flags from the night before sagged against the fences, tired from the wind, and the air smelled faintly of rain and dust. For the first time in years, Cole felt no weight pressing on his chest, just a hollow calm, the kind that follows after storm has finally spent itself. He rode out early, before the town had woken. The road stretched ahead of him, wet and glinting, leading through familiar country, the kind that remembered every hoofprint, every secret once whispered beneath its sky. The horse's slow rhythm steadied his thoughts, carried him through open silence. Somewhere behind him, Mason Creek was waking to another day. He didn't look back. The sun rose higher, burning the mist away until the world was wide and clear. He stopped by the creek that wound behind the old Turner Ranch, the same creek where he and Anna used to sit in summer, feet dangling in the cool water, dreaming about futures that never came. He dismounted and stood there for a long while, watching the sunlight play across the ripples. The world hadn't changed much, but he had. He knelt by the water and picked up a smooth stone, feeling the chill of it against his palm. He thought about how love leaves its mark, how it reshapes a person slowly, quietly, until they're never quite the same again. The kind of love he and Anna shared had burned bright, too bright, fierce enough to light a path out of town, but not gentle enough to guide him back. And yet, standing there, Cole realized something he'd never understood before. Maybe love wasn't meant to be a finish line. Maybe it was the road itself, the thing that carried you forward even after it was gone. He let the stone fall back into the water and watched it disappear beneath the current. The sound was small, almost nothing, but it felt like release. That afternoon, he went back to the ranch one last time. The house stood quiet, empty except for the faint smell of dust and cedar. Sunlight slanted through the cracked blinds, turning the air golden. He walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the remnant of life his father had built, a life he'd once run from. It felt strange to think that leaving had cost him everything that mattered, and yet returning had given him clarity he'd never had before. On the table sat an old photograph, his father, his brother, and himself, standing in front of the barn, all smiles and sunburned faces. He picked it up, tracing the edges with a thumb, and for the first time in years, he felt forgiveness bloom quietly inside him, for his father, for Luke, for himself. He left the photo there, took one last look at the empty house, and stepped outside. The sky was wide open now, painted in the pale colors of late afternoon. He saddled up his horse and turned toward the ridge where the town disappeared into the horizon. As he rode, memories folded over him like layers of wind. Laughter in a hayloft, the sound of Anna's voice calling his name, the glow of lanterns during summer nights. They didn't hurt as sharply anymore. They just lived inside him, like quiet echoes of a place he'd once belonged to. He reached the ridge by sunset. The town of Mason Creek shimmered in the distance, golden under the fading light. Cole stopped there, letting the horse rest. He looked down at the place that had given him everything, love, pain, redemption, and smiled. Not the smile of a man who'd lost, but of one who'd finally understood. Some stories, he realized, don't end the way you imagine. They don't close neatly or offer second chances. Sometimes they just teach you how to carry love without breaking under it. And that was enough. As the last of the light slipped behind the hills, Cole turned his horse toward the open road. The wind carried the faint scent of rain again. Soft, familiar, forgiving. He felt it brush against his face, cool and clean, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel haunted by what he'd left behind. He felt guided by it. The road stretched long and empty ahead of him, but it no longer felt lonely. It felt like home, wide, uncertain, alive. And as the sky darkened into a deep blue, Cole Turner rode on, a silhouette against the horizon, the sound of hooves fading into the quiet rhythm of the earth. He didn't know where the road would end, but for the first time in his life, he didn't need to, because somewhere between heartbreak and healing, between what was and what will never be, he'd found what he'd been searching for all along: peace. Days turned into weeks, and the world kept moving, as it always does. The story of the rodeo faded into town talk. Who won? Who fell? Who didn't show up for the closing ceremony? Cole Turner's name drifted through those conversations like an echo. Some said he left before dawn. Others claimed they saw him riding north toward the mountains. But Mason Creek didn't ask too many questions about ghosts that came and went. Life resumed its quiet rhythm. The fields dried after the rain. Fences were mended, and laughter returned to the streets. For Anna, the days filled with familiar sounds. The creak of the porch swing, the hum of the wind through tall grass, the steady voice of her husband, Luke. She never spoke Cole's name, not even in passing, but sometimes, when the sky turned the same color it had that night at the rodeo, she'd catch herself staring into the distance, wondering if he ever found what he was looking for. She never knew that he had, that the moment he rode away, he wasn't running anymore. He was simply letting go. Out on the open road, Cole found quiet towns and endless miles of horizon. He took small jobs along the way, fixing fences, breaking horses, staying just long enough to earn a meal and a bed before moving on. He carried no photographs, no reminders of what once was, just a memory of a woman whose love had shaped him in ways time couldn't erase. Sometimes at dusk, he'd stop by a ridge and watch the sun dip low, the light painting the world in soft gold. In those moments, he'd feel her presence, not as pain but as warmth. The kind of love that doesn't end, only changes form. One evening, months later, he came across a small town nestled between hills, where the locals gathered each night at a weathered old barn-turned dance hall. He stood by the doorway, watching couples sway slowly under string lights, boots tapping to an old country tune. The air smelled of hay, smoke, and something like happiness. A young woman smiled at him, not because she knew him, but because kindness was her nature. He nodded back, a small gesture, nothing more. But in that simple moment, something inside him shifted. He realized he could still love the world. In new ways, quieter ways. Love didn't have to live in a single face, a single past. It could live in a way the light hit the grass, in the laughter of strangers, in the peace that came with finally forgiving yourself. That night, as he lay under an open sky, the stars burned bright and patient above him. The air was cool, the earth steady beneath his back. He thought of Mason Creek, of Anna, of Luke, of his father's land, and smiled softly to himself. He didn't need to go back. Some goodbyes were permanent, but that didn't make them cruel. Sometimes, letting something end was the kindest way to honor what it once meant. He closed his eyes, listening to the wind move through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a train's low whistle carried across the plains, a sound of moving forward, of journeys still unfolding. And as the sound faded, so did the restlessness inside him. All that remained was stillness, the quiet peace of a man who'd finally stopped chasing ghosts and learned to live among the living again. Cole Turner was never seen in Mason Creek after that summer. But on rare nights, when the moon hung low over the fields and the air smelled of rain, some folks swore they saw a lone rider passing along the old West Ridge, a shadow against the sky, moving slow and steady toward the horizon. No one ever stopped him. No one ever called out. They just watched in silence, the way you watch something sacred and fleeting. Because maybe that's what he was now. Not a legend, not a tragedy, but a man who finally found peace where the road ends and the heart begins again. And somewhere far ahead, beyond the dust, beyond the past, the world waited, quiet, open, endless. The last ride home was never about going back. It was about learning how to move forward, with love, with grace, and with the kind of peace only the road can teach. Cole Turner never found fame again, not the kind that fills arenas or wins trophies. But he found something quieter, something better, peace. Out there on the open road, beneath an endless Texas sky, he learned that love doesn't always stay. Sometimes, it simply teaches you how to keep riding when it's gone. Mason Creek forgot his name, but the land remembered him, in the way the wind moved through the grass, in the way the stars still burned bright over the ridge where he once said goodbye. And maybe that's all any of us can hope for, not to be remembered for how we left, but for how we learned to let go. Because in the end, the last ride home isn't a return. It's a release.
For more stories, kindly like, share, comment, and subscribe.